all our proceedings in the House of Lords will be conducted digitally. This is the first time that in either house this has been done. So we'll start with questions to ministers. We'll follow with a private notice question from Baroness Smith of Basildon. We then have 2 debates, and finally we have a ministerial statement on COVID-19. So, virtual proceedings of the House will now begin. I remind members that these proceedings are subject to parliamentary privilege, and what we say is available to the public, both in Hansard and to those listening. I remind participating members that their microphones will be set to mute and that they should unmute their microphones shortly before we reach their place in the speakers list. Members are asked not to use the group chat function. My lords, the virtual proceedings on all questions are basically these. I will call each oral question in the normal way. I will then call on the minister to make the initial response. I will then call the lord who asked the original question to ask their supplementary question in the usual way. The minister will again respond, and I will then call in turn those lords asking supplementary questions as listed on the speakers list. Could I say, please, can you ensure that questions and answers are short? And I apologise in advance if it's not possible for everyone to be called. Please ensure that you unmute your microphones prior to asking your supplementary question. Your microphone will be returned to mute when you finish speaking. In accordance with the guidance agreed by the Procedure Committee, if your name is not listed, it is not, I fear, possible to ask a supplementary question nor to take part in the proceedings. So let us start. I call the Earl of Clancarty to ask the first oral question.
My lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
Minister,
my Lord
Bolton.
My lords, the government has taken a number of steps to support the self-employed in this difficult time. On the 26th of March, the Chancellor announced the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, which will provide eligible individuals with a grant worth 80% of their normal profits for 3 months. The Chancellor has also announced several other policies which may benefit the self-employed. These include the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, mortgage holidays, and an income tax deferral.
The Earl of Clancarty, supplementary question.
My lords, this is necessary support, but there remain concerns about fairness and those falling through the cracks. Will the government look again at the £50,000 cap, a distinct unfairness compared to the JRS? Will they review the income threshold, which at 50% excludes many for whom a mixed portfolio is the norm? Can graduates and those who have been on maternal or sick leave have unrepresentative years discounted? And would the minister agree that from construction workers to music teachers, those paid through dividends should not be penalised for adopting a standard accounting system actively encouraged by Conservative governments?
Minister?
My Lord,
go on.
My Lords, delivering a scheme for the self-employed is a difficult operational challenge, particularly in the rapid timescale required. The government's priority is to get support to those who need it as quickly as possible in the fairest way. The design of the scheme, including the £50,000 threshold, means it's targeted at those who need it most and who are most reliant on their self-employment income. 95% of those who are mostly self-employed will benefit. Those who do not meet the eligibility criteria for the SEISS may have access to a range of other support, including the more generous universal credit and deferral tax schemes. I hope to address the dividend point in a separate question.
Lord Floyd, supplementary question. Lord Floyd.
Will the government give greater priority to speeding up the provision of financial assistance for SMEs, and in particular through the new Futures Fund?
Minister?
My Lords, the government is making sure that people and businesses have access to the support they need as quickly as possible. We've tried to design measures that can be operationalised quickly and effectively. Lenders have increased the number of loans they're approving every day, and staff are working to process applications as quickly as possible. Over 12,000 of the CBILS loans have been made to businesses so far, meaning a benefit of some £2 billion worth of finance, and the rate of approval is accelerating.
Baroness Ball, a supplementary question.
My Lords, large numbers of freelance and self-employed workers operate as personal service companies. Indeed, employers demand this of them. This means they receive the majority of their remuneration as dividends, not salary, and it disbars them from the SEISS. Will government consider accepting proof of dividend income from dividend certificates and self-assessment tax returns so that freelancers can fairly claim compensation on income earned through dividends from their own personal service company?
Minister.
My Lords, the policy for a proprietor of a business to take a dividend is a personal one, and it is done largely to mitigate employers' national insurance. So I don't believe that it is right for the government to look at that as a form of income. A dividend is defined as the surplus of a business after all its expenses have been paid, profits are retained and tax has been paid. So whilst we of course will keep an open mind, I don't think it's something that we will be dealing with urgently.
Baroness Young of Old Scone, supplementary question.
I think the answer that the Minister has just given is tremendously inadequate for many of these very small businesses who were advised by reputable accountants that this was the most tax efficient way of taking what was in many cases very small levels of income from tiny businesses. I really must press the Minister. These people are not eligible for the self-employed income support scheme. They now find themselves without any income. They have commitments, and they are often operating on such tiny margins that taking out a loan is really out of the question in terms of the medium-term future. So could the Minister tell us how many of these left behind small businesses there are, what the government is going to do urgently to address this issue and to help them out, and when? It's simply not satisfactory to say they chose to take that choice in the past and now they must reap the detriment as a result. This is very, very unfair.
Minister.
My Lords, I won't repeat the arguments I made in the earlier question, but we will, of course, keep it under review. There are some 11 measures that have been made available for a variety of self-employed people and businesses, and I won't list all of those now, but there is a pretty strong safety net. But if there is evidence of those who fall through the net, we will, of course, keep an open mind.
Lord Fox, supplementary question.
Thank you, Lord Speaker. Nothing the Minister has said will make insecure workers any more secure today. So can we try another line? Because there is, to coin a phrase, an oven-ready way of improving the rights and entitlements of many self-employed people. So can the Minister pledge that the government will at last implement the Taylor Review of modern working practices? It's time to give insecure workers at least some sense of security.
Minister.
My Lords, we will certainly keep it under review. I'm not able to give a cast iron commitment on that now, but I do think it is worth restating that the package of support that we've announced over the last month is very substantial, and we've taken the policy to make it available over a number of different ways, rather than some countries like Germany, where it's been a very targeted form of support. But with these 11 different measures, we are confident that the vast majority of small business proprietors will have their situations protected.
Lord Randall of Uxbridge.
Is my noble friend the Minister able to give any clarity on the timescale of when the rolling out and the funds will be available, particularly to the self-employed? He may well be aware that there are numerous scams targeting the self-employed, and there's a great deal of uncertainty amongst them.
My Lords, I'm very aware of the urgency and the speed at which these things need to be dealt with. We From midnight of the 20th of April, 185,000 businesses claimed the coronavirus job retention scheme. That is to protect 1.3 million jobs and totaled £1.5 billion. The small business grant funding, as of the 20th of April, around £6 billion of grants have been paid out, which is about half of the total funding. Some 490,000 businesses have benefited. So the money is going out. I completely accept that it could go out quicker, but the rate of escalation is increasing.
Baroness Ritchie of Downpatrick, a supplementary question. Baroness Ritchie. Okay, we'll move on. Lord Livermore, supplementary question.
My lords, as noble lords have made clear, there are some very significant gaps in the current scheme. My noble friend Baroness Young asked about the numbers not covered by this scheme. Could the noble Lord the Minister say now how many self-employed people will now see substantial reductions in their income as a result of not being covered by the existing scheme? And will he consider additional measures to provide protection for them?
Minister.
I might have been the first one on.
My lords, we estimate that 95% of small businesses will benefit from the structure of the schemes that we've been discussing. And then beyond that, we have made enhancements to the universal credit system, which will benefit small business proprietors who are caught and do not benefit from the broader measures. I can put into Hansard a detailed explanation of how those changes work, because they're quite complicated and I'm conscious of brevity.
Lord Purvis of Tweed, supplementary question.
The self-employed will have to wait another month before they can start applying for support, and it'll be 6 weeks from now until the first payments. The Canadian government announced support packages for self-employed and employed on the 15th of March, and payments have started to be processed last week for Canadian businesses. What is preventing the government fast-tracking support for self-employed people who've got this huge uncertainty, especially those who will be women and mothers who are having to look after children and also have a real impact on their direct income now?
Minister.
My lords, as I mentioned in the earlier question, we have pushed out some £6 billion worth of grant payments already, and when the HMRC opened their coronavirus job retention scheme on the 20th, some 185,000 claims have already been made. So the money is going out, but I accept that it needs to go out more quickly.
My lords, the time allowed for this question has now elapsed, and I apologise for the two members who are not reached. I do apologise for that. We come to the second oral question. Lord Black of Brentwood.
My lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper, and I declare my interest as Chairman of the Royal College of Music. So just declaring my interest as Chairman of the Royal College of Music.
Apologies for intervening. Minister, Baroness Barron.
My lords, the COVID-19 pandemic presents a significant challenge to many of DCMS's sectors, including, of course, music and the wider creative industries. Government has announced unprecedented support for business and workers to protect them against the current economic emergency, including the coronavirus job retention scheme, £330 billion worth of government-backed and guaranteed loans to support businesses, and the self-employed income support scheme. And we're continuing to work very closely with partners across music and the creative industries to understand the impact of COVID-19 on their activities and provide the necessary support.
Lord Black of Brentwood, supplementary question.
I thank my noble friend for that answer. Music, the bedrock of our creative economy, is in deep trouble. The virus has had a terrible impact on the sector because music can't exist without audiences and human contact, and both have disappeared, along with the livelihoods of thousands of musicians. Is my noble friend aware that 4 in 10 creative organisations, where many hourly paid musicians are employed, have seen their income drop by 100%? The truth is that the music business model is being destroyed as a result. And as it becomes clear that mass gatherings are likely to be the last to be reintroduced after lockdown, and with many event cancellations having started in January, this will be a devastating lost year for the whole sector and for so many individual artists. Would my noble friend agree that there must be an urgent sector-specific package of financial support for music and the arts, similar to the €50 billion programme in Germany, to ensure the sector and all those who work in it survive the emergency?
Minister?
My noble friend is right to highlight the huge challenges to cash flow for these sectors of our economy. The government, as I said earlier, has focused on offering very broad support and doing that at scale and at pace. And what's happening now is that, in particular, my honourable friend, the Minister for Digital and Culture, is meeting with representatives from the music industry and the wider creative industries on a weekly basis to understand individual impacts, gather the evidence, and then see what we can do to support them on any issues that emerge from that.
Baroness Quinn, supplementary question.
My Lords, I declare my interest as Chair of the Board of Tyne and Wear Museums, and in saying that would like to thank DCMS and Arts Council staff for working with museums and understanding the particular and deep ways that this crisis is affecting them. As the Minister knows, many museums across the UK have a fine record not only in promoting tourism, but also engaging with schools and with different communities in their areas. And for that reason, can I echo the call that's just been made that the government ensure that there will be a joined-up, targeted approach across all relevant government departments, backed by the Treasury, to support the creative sector and its key economic and social role as we try to move forward.
The noble lady is right to highlight the extraordinary part that creative industries have played in the success of the British economy. And I'd also like to commend the work that Tyne and Wear museums have done prior to the crisis, supporting children educated at home. And I imagine demand for that work is expanding greatly at the moment. The noble lady will be aware that the Arts Council England has announced £160 million of emergency funding and is in the process of gathering further information on needs within the sector. We continue to work very closely with them.
Lord Aberdare, supplementary question.
My Lords, orchestras and other performing organisations are currently focused on short-term survival with the help of the government's welcome support schemes, despite gaps which particularly affect the creative sector. Can I ask the Minister to expand a little on her answer to Lord Black and give an indication of when the ban on large-scale events might be lifted, so that orchestras that have managed to survive that long can and find themselves without bookings, without tour plans, and indeed without income, have some hope and understanding of what support they might be able to expect in the future.
Minister?
The decision about ban on large-scale gatherings will obviously be driven by the scientific advice that we receive in government. More broadly, the department is now starting to work on plans of how we emerge from this crisis, but we don't underestimate the challenge that some degree of long-term social distancing poses to the economic model that orchestras and theatres and others will face.
Lord Kane, supplementary question.
My Lords, while much of the focus will be on the so-called high-end events that are affected by COVID-19, including the cancellation of many festivals this summer, would my noble friend also consider the plight of small music venues, which play a key role in nurturing new talent, as well as being essential and important community assets? Many world-conquering British rock bands have started out playing to small audiences in such venues. Earlier this month, the Music Venue Trust warned that over 500 such small venues could face permanent closure as a result of lockdown. Is there anything more that the government can do to support them?
Minister?
I thank my noble friend for his question, and we recognise the financial challenges that small venues face, particularly those in London who might not benefit from the relief to business rates, which they have a rateable value above £51,000. And we are grateful to the Music Venue Trust for the work they're doing, gathering evidence from the sector, and we will use that to inform our plans as we move forward.
Lord Clement Jones, supplementary question.
Thank you, Lord Speaker. As the Minister will know, and Lord Black and other noble lords have highlighted, the music sector and other live arts performance has been extremely badly hit by the coronavirus lockdown. We have discussed current support for the sector this morning. Will the government give serious consideration to financial incentives to stimulate and promote UK music and other live performance production after the lockdown, especially in view of the recovery period that will be required?
Minister?
So the noble lord is right that the recovery period could be longer for these sectors than some other. We are working very hard, as I've said, to understand the evidence on this. And to quote the Secretary of State yesterday in evidence to the Select Committee, his words were, "We have not reached the end of the road in our thinking." So we are listening, analysing the evidence and working on where we should focus our support.
Baroness Rawlins, supplementary question.
My Lords, I applaud the government on the way they have coped with this very alarming pestilence. Does the Minister agree that COVID-19 has had a dramatic effect on the music sector and the creative economy, a major source of the health of the country? Much of this is the result of the repeated slogan, successfully stay at home. So successful has it been that, as reported, people dare not venture out even to be tested. So would the government now say, instead, get tested and contact tracing?
Minister?
I thank my noble friend and agree absolutely of the critical part that this sector has played both in the growth of the economy and in the creation of very high quality jobs. As I said in response to an earlier question, our advice will be based on the science and on the 5 tests that were highlighted earlier this week, and I can't add to that at this stage.
Baroness Kidron, supplementary question.
My Lords, the power of the creative industries is often expressed in its inability to generate 100 billion to the economy, but perhaps more important is its contribution to the national society. Since lockdown, one of the few bright spots in this difficult time has been witnessed the irrefutable creativity and results from the rise of book and film clubs, galleries and restaurants, ballet from the kitchen, and rock legends performing in their bedrooms. Would the noble lady recognise the importance of this sector and a specific financial support package that does not only look to the immediate, but rather recognises the atypical workforce and the length of time it takes to get an idea from page to public?
Well, congratulations on getting through all the playback that you had on that. Minister.
The noble lady is absolutely right and speaks from great personal experience, and I'm sure many noble lords have enjoyed extraordinary examples of agility and creativity with National Theatre Live, some of the work from the British Film Institute, and of course the music industry. In terms of funding, I hope the noble lady is aware that we announced £750 million of R&D funding for small and medium-sized firms, where that extraordinary combination of creativity and tech we hope will flourish further in future.
but I would absolutely agree with her that at a time when many of us are reflecting on the values of our society, the creative industries can help us think that through and build that sense of connection that we all feel so strongly.
Thank you. My Lords, I regret the time allowed for this question has now elapsed, and I apologise for, I think there were 4 members who were actually excluded on that. Rather underlines the need for short questions and short answers.
Lord Speaker.
Third question. We come to the third all question. Lord Young of Cookham. Lord Young.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
Minister.
My Lords, the government believes that no one should be criminalised simply for sleeping rough. In the cross-government rough sleeping strategy published in August 2018, we committed to review the Vagrancy Act. The review has consulted with stakeholders on all options, including retention, repeal, replacement or amendment. The government will announce the conclusions of the review in due course.
Lord Young of Cookham, supplementary question.
I'm grateful to my noble and learned friend for that reply, but would he agree that attitudes towards those sleeping rough have softened over the last 200 years, and that legislation that refers to idle and disorderly rogues and vagabonds sleeping in coach houses and stables has no place in modern legislation? Given that charities working with rough sleepers have criticised use of the Vagrancy Act for drawing rough sleepers into the criminal justice system, at the very time that the government's commendable rough sleeping initiative is seeking to tackle the problems of rough sleeping at their roots, can my noble friend say when the review that he referred to, which was scheduled to be completed in March this year, will come to an end? And does he agree that we should replace it with legislation that is more appropriate and more effective?
Minister.
My Lords, I'm grateful to my noble friend for his further question. The review, which was led largely by the Ministry of Local Government, that is Community and Local Government, has essentially been completed. But in light of the work being done with respect to COVID, it has not yet been reviewed by ministers, but we will seek to bring it forward as soon as possible. I would, however, acknowledge that the language of the 1824 Act is archaic, albeit its meaning is clear. I reiterate that we have no desire to criminalise those who simply are sleeping rough, but the provisions of the Act also apply in respect of begging and persistent begging, for example. And we want to consult and have consulted with all interested parties, including local authorities and the police, in order to determine a way forward.
Lord Judge, supplementary question.
If Section 4 of the Vagrancy Act had been, which was enacted after repeated harvest failures which created armies of the dispossessed, were presented to us for enactment today, beyond the archaic language to which Lord Young has already referred, we should reject it as vague and uncertain, and arguably tarnished with an improper reverse burden of proof. If we would not enact it, why should it remain on the statute book for a minute longer?
Minister. I think you've...
I'm sorry, my computer is refusing to unmute, but I'm there now. My Lords, I don't accept that the essentials of the provisions of Section 4 would not be worthy of enactment today. And the provision does have assistance to local authorities and indeed the police. And I understand quite often the police are able to suggest the possibility of prosecution under Section 4 as a means to persuade those who are homeless and those who are begging to seek assistance either from drug and alcohol hubs or by seeking benefits. So it remains of use in the view of some authorities.
Lord Bourne of Aberystwyth, supplementary question.
My Lords, very much in support of what we have heard from the previous speakers. I think the country has witnessed the awesome challenges presented by rough sleepers from the pandemic, and believe that the spirit of national unity and cohesion that we're seeing would be totally behind the cause of repeal. I think it can't happen too soon, and I think the country is really looking for a lead on issues like this, as I say, where we've seen dreadful suffering from rough sleepers. Eradication of rough sleeping coupled with a repeal of a 200-year-old act is surely something the government should be supporting with enthusiasm.
Minister?
I mentioned before, there is a concern as to whether we should repeal this legislation or amend it or substitute it with something else. And as regards the position that arises in light of the COVID-19 situation, may I say that the government has asked local authorities in England to support rough sleepers into appropriate accommodation. And indeed, I understand that more than 5,400 rough sleepers, as over 90% of those on the streets at the beginning of the crisis and known to local authorities, have now been made offers of safe accommodation. And we are concerned that that should continue.
Lord Bird, supplementary question. Lord Bird? Okay, Lord Fowkes of Cumnock.
But will the Minister confirm that the provisions of this ancient act as they apply to Scotland were repealed in the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982 in Westminster? The kind of things that he talks about, persistent or aggressive begging, are being dealt with in Scotland by other legal provisions. Why can't this be done in England? And why can't the government move quickly to bring England and Wales in line with the excellent situation in Scotland?
Minister?
My Lords, the provisions of Section 4, but not Section 3 of the Vagrancy Act 1824, were extended to Scotland by Section 15 of the Prevention of Crimes Act 1871. Section 4 is, of course, concerned with rough sleeping. Section 3 is concerned with begging. The noble Lord is quite right that the extension of Section 4 to Scotland was repealed by the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982. It should be noted that in doing that, the 1982 Act, by Part 4, brought in a series of very specific offences of what were termed annoying, offensive, obstructive or dangerous behaviour, essentially public order offences. So the law in that regard was brought up to date in Scotland. And indeed, it has been, in some instances, amended in England as well, for example, by virtue of the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014.
Baroness Grender, supplementary question.
Does the Minister agree that Dame Louise Case's strategy has provided hope for rough sleepers with well over, as he's already mentioned, 5,000 people off the streets within a fortnight? Tempting as it is to ask what took the government so long prior to the pandemic, instead, will the Minister share with us what commitment the government has now made to ensure none of those rough sleepers return to the streets? And will he undertake to organise an urgent meeting with members of this House who are interested in this issue to outline those plans and those commitments?
Minister?
My Lords, we consider that there has been a truly remarkable achievement since the COVID epidemic emerged with regard to achieving suitable accommodation for rough sleepers. And a great deal of that work has been done by local government and other agencies and charities across the country. And of course, we would like to see these people, these vulnerable people, protected going forward. We have provided additional funding to local authorities in excess of £1.5 billion in order that they can be more able to respond to the pressures brought to bear by COVID. And that includes suitable social welfare steps in respect of those who don't have appropriate housing. I should only add that I would be more than willing to meet with relevant ministers, although I should add that the lead in respect of this matter is taken by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government.
Lord Falconer of Thornton. Lord Falconer? No. Lord Harris of Pentragarth.
Following on from the Noble Lord Fuchs's question, if Scotland can abolish this without any harmful effects, surely we can do the same in this country. And bearing in mind what the Minister has said about using the law to encourage rough speakers to find help, there are plenty of other laws on the statute book already about being a public nuisance, disorderly behaviour, which could be used in exactly the same way. And if I could just ask him, given the government's wonderful promises about housing rough speakers in hotels, how many more rough sleepers are left, do you think, who have not yet been housed?
Minister?
The position is this: there are other statutory provisions in place addressing public order offences. The Public Order Act 1986 is an example. I also mentioned the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. However, the evidential requirements of these other statutory provisions can be quite challenging when dealing with those who are sleeping rough. For example, it's not possible to serve a community protection notice under the 2014 Act without a prior written warning. And noble lords will appreciate that it may be difficult in one instance to issue a prior written warning to someone with no fixed abode, and then to follow that up with further steps. So there is a place for the provisions of the 1824 Act, but of course we will look very carefully at all sources of opinion in respect of this matter. I would reiterate that Section 3 of the 1824 Act was never extended to Scotland, only Section 4.
My lords, the time allowed for this question has now elapsed, and we move on to the fourth and last oral question. Baroness Mackintosh of Pickering. Baroness Mackintosh.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name.
Minister, Lord Bethell.
Every NHS and care worker must get the personal protection equipment that they need. We have a PPE plan with 3 strands: guidance, distribution and future supply. Through buying more PPE from abroad and making more at home, we will have enough PPE to meet our needs. Historically, there has been limited UK manufacture of PPE, but we now have a make strategy under Lord Dayton to encourage manufacturers throughout the UK to produce PPE, including the textile heartlands of the North.
Baroness Mackintosh of Pickering.
My lords, will my noble friend congratulate the company Industrial Textiles and Plastics, who make the much needed impermeable material for gowns, and Barber and Burberry, who are manufacturing these gowns, all in this case free of charge, distributed through a first-based volunteer organisation for use by local NHS trusts. Will the government agree to use this model going forward for the manufacture and distribution of gowns through local manufacturers, local distributors for use by NHS trusts?
Minister.
My lords, I share the noble Baroness's endorsement of the tremendous response from British manufacturing. We have 176 firms who have applied to the scheme, and we are processing their suggestions at the moment. Lord Dayton is a powerful advocate for the MAKE programme, and I'd like to particularly thank Don and Lowe, INEOS and Servitech, who have already made a considerable contribution to production.
Lord Harris of Haringey.
My lords, NHS providers warned last night of a very real risk that frontline staff confidence and trust in national leaders could be significantly undermined unless trust leaders and staff are confident that they're receiving adequate supplies of the right equipment at the right time. On Saturday, Robert Jenrick promised that a very large consignment of PPE would arrive from Turkey on Sunday. In fact, it was not till yesterday that half of the promised 84 tons arrived. Trying to grab the headlines with a dubious promise is hardly likely to help staff confidence. Is it true that Turkey was only asked to facilitate the shipment the day after the minister's promise? And anyway, could the noble Lord the Minister tell us what is the daily requirement for PPE in the NHS, and how does this compare with the Turkish shipment?
Minister.
My noble lord, it isn't correct that Turkey was only asked to intervene at the last minute. We've been in constant, daily and regular contact with the Turkish government. We are grateful to the Turkish governments for their help and involvement, and we continue to work with Turkish companies on this order. In terms of the requirement of the NHS, undoubtedly, this virus requires much more protection than any other disease that we have encountered. The demand for PPE will rise and continue to rise, and we will meet that need through our MAKE programme and continued strong relationships with foreign providers.
Baroness Brinton, supplementary question.
My Lords, the Methodists' homes have reported 250 deaths of residents and 2 staff of COVID since the beginning of the outbreak. Last week, they were forced to buy 200,000 face masks for £200,000, 5 times the going rate. The current government allocation is 300 masks per home per week, where the reality is that they need over 1,000. My Lords, the system for providing support for our care homes who are really struggling, actually now the focus of the outbreak, is just going from bad to worse. Can the Minister please tell us exactly when homes will receive the PPE they need?
Minister.
The noble Baroness is entirely right to commend the sacrifice of hardworking care workers who put their safety on the front line and put themselves in harm's way. She is also correct to allude to the challenge by care homes, the 15,000 of them who have previously largely looked after their own procurement arrangements. And this COVID disease presents an enormous procurement challenge. The government has stepped up, is helping care homes in many ways. Nearly 1 billion items of PPE have been distributed in the last 6 weeks, and we will continue in that commitment to support care homes.
Lord Blencathra, a supplementary question.
My Lord, may I first of all congratulate my noble friend on the excellent job he's doing in the department and for his diligence in answering our questions. But can I ask him this? If hand washing destroys coronavirus in our hands, why on earth don't we launder these 450,000 so-called disposable garments we throw away each day? And is that not an appalling waste of resources, as well as bad for our environment? And will we radically step up making our own washable PPE now and for the foreseeable future?
Minister.
The noble lord makes an entirely reasonable and common sense request, and it's one that I put to officials myself. The practicalities of PPE are that you have to be prepared to be covered in large amount of human fluids in order to and for the garments to be waterproof against their impact. Staff are uncomfortable with wearing garments that may have been used in that way previously, and in order to maintain levels of hygiene and of to rhythm of disease, it is very difficult to reuse them. We do, however, have a committee looking at the potential for reuse, and they will be reporting shortly.
The Earl of Errol, a supplementary question.
May I ask the noble Lord the Minister how the NHS expects to be able to buy PPE when it insists on paying 30 days after delivery, when everyone else is paying up front, especially internationally? And this applies both when we want to import and also to preempt export. It might explain the interruption in the Turkish supply chain.
Minister.
My Lords, the question of payment is a relevant one. We have put in place new facilities for different means of payment. But may I just alert, noble Lords, to the very large amount of fraud that there is existing in this marketplace at the moment. I am aware of several police inquiries into situations where providers have sought early payment or upfront payment, and we have to protect both the patients from failure to delivery and the taxpayer for value of money.
The Lord Bishop of Newcastle.
My Lords, in view of the inability, despite the very best efforts of central government to supply sufficient PPE where it is needed, will the Minister take note of the achievements of the Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust, working in partnership with Wingrave Motors, Northumbria University, Barber and many others, to produce and deliver PPE directly to hospitals and hospices in the region. Will the Minister consider devolving more power to the regions and those on the front line?
Minister.
The reference Bishop makes is an entirely right one, and I would like, in fact, to pay tribute to the very hard-working professionals in the NHS and care home procurement staff. They have caught themselves in the eye of the most tremendous storm, and under extremely difficult circumstances are working hard to meet the challenge. In particular, though, I'd like to pay tribute to the local procurement teams who are using their initiative to answer the challenge, and our approach to PPE procurement is one of collaboration with these sorts of local initiatives. I'd like to commend them, and they very much spell the future of PPE procurement.
Baroness Thornton, supplementary question. Baroness Thornton. Baroness Blackwood of North.
Yeah,
sorry.
Baroness
Thornton.
Give us a moment to press our unmute button. I was going to ask about waiving regulatory requirements, but actually I think I'm going to return to the question that was asked by my noble friend Lord Harris. Is it the case, therefore, Minister, that you actually don't know what the number is of the PPE that is required? Because my noble friend asked you that question specifically. How much PPE is required on a daily or weekly basis? If you don't know that answer, that's fine. Then you probably need to find out and tell us.
The noble baroness asked a perfectly reasonable question, but I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head the individual amounts. I can tell her that to date we've delivered 135 million masks, 148 million aprons, 1.3 million gowns, 485 million gloves, more than 900 million items in total, and the amount that we are providing increases absolutely every day. I won't hide from the noble baroness or from the House that this is a fast-moving situation, and it is my impression that the demand for PPE will soon extend to other places of the work, to other workplace situations, and the demand will increase. So it would be wrong to try and give the impression that this is a fixed amount that we should try to hit with short-term targets.
As I half called Baroness Blackwood, I will call her properly, but please a sharp question and reply. Baroness Blackwood of North Oxford.
Thank you, Lord Speaker. Just to follow on from my noble friend, Lord Blencathra, it's vital that we explore all options to increase sustainability of UK stocks. Now, I understand UVC is often used for surface sterilisation, and now some early research has suggested it could also be used for gowns and masks using UV sources, which are found in lots of biosafety cabinets in academic, commercial and hospital labs. If the reuse committee, which the Minister mentioned, has not started looking at this, could he please ask them to consider whether this is a viable option to extend the lifespan of PPE?
Minister.
Noble Baroness is right to champion this point. The Cleveland Clinic is known to us. I will ensure that it is played into the task force that is working on both the regulations and practicalities of reuse.
My Lords, that concludes the virtual proceedings on oral questions. Thank you very much, both the questioners and the ministers. The virtual proceedings themselves will resume at 12:15 for the private notice question of Baroness Smith of Basildon, and she will be asking private notice question then, but we stand adjourned until that moment. Thank you so much.